Hello, everybody. As I understand, these sessions are from back to back, and they want you to begin on time and end on time. It's great to be here with all of you. If you don't know, I used to be the mayor of Los Angeles and the Speaker of the California State Assembly some time ago. I don't know how many of you are from California. I was Speaker in the 1990s. I was mayor from 2005 to 2013. And my talk today is about education and the implications for our economy, our democracy, and the civil rights that I think is so very important to many of us. Let me begin with how I got involved in this issue. I often say I went to Catholic school for most of my life. It gave me the foundation, but it was a public school that gave me a second chance. I was kicked out of high school when I was 16 years old. I went to a public high school that had a 25% graduation rate, that after going to that school from a Catholic college prep education, I was put in an upholstery class, basic reading classes, and basic math classes. And of course, it shouldn't be surprising to any of you that I dropped out. Fortunately, I had a great mom who put in her 4 kids the notion of education being the path to opportunity, always set high expectations for her children. I had a great teacher, Herman Katz, who's no longer with us, but was really an inspiration and is the reason why I fortunately went back to school, went to school at night, went to a community college with a 1.4 graduation, grade point average rather, got about a 3.6, 40 some odd transferable units in a year, went to UCLA, but went to UCLA on an affirmative action program. So I've often said that I obviously could never have gotten in without that kind of program. Some would say I came in through the back door, but one thing's for sure, I got out the front. In fact, I'm the only person to have ever graduated from UCLA who went on to become Speaker of the California State Assembly and Mayor of Los Angeles. I believe in investing in people. And I think why I've been as passionate about this issue of education, and particularly educating kids in our urban schools, is because I think there's a connection into investment in kids and the success they're able to enjoy down the road. Hi there. Welcome. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the LA experience, frame it within a larger context. So I get elected in 2005. I'm mayor of Los Angeles. There's a lot to do about the fact that I'm the first from my community in 133 years to be mayor. And I often said, well, why are you making such a big thing about it? I was born here. My mother was born here. My grandpa came here 100 years ago. But I understood intuitively that I represented the changing demographics of a city that when you close your eyes, increasingly 15 years later, California is looking more and more like it. States and large cities around the country looking more and more like it. Let me describe that demographic. About 48% Latino. When you look at Asian, African, and Latinos, you're talking about 67% of the city. When you look at the public schools, you're talking about over 90%. These are mind-boggling numbers when you look at when I grew up in the 1950s and 60s, what our public schools and what our city looked like, maybe altogether, not 67%, but closer to 25 or 6. So dramatic changes over a 3 or 4 decade period. When I was going to public school in Los Angeles, we had the best public schools in the nation. We were top 5 in per pupil spending. It was without question people went to California, went to LA because of our public schools. That wasn't true for all our schools because, as I said, I went to a school with a 25% graduation rate. But it became crystal clear when I became mayor that if LA was going to be successful, we needed to do something about the fact that we had a 44% graduation rate. That when you looked at Latinos and African Americans who together, I've already mentioned about together, I guess about 57% of the number that I mentioned when you include Asians, so about 57% of our kids, disproportionately not graduating from high school, not going on to college. In fact, the number for them, about 10% of them going on to four-year colleges. So almost immediately, we began to address this issue because I understood there was a connection between the future, the economic future, and when I speak of LA, I'm speaking of California and the nation as well, the democratic future, and the issue of social cohesion and civil rights that I'll speak to in a second. So it became crystal clear that we had to do something about it. We tried to take over our public schools. The mayor historically is not in charge, and particularly by Constitution and Charter is not in charge. I went to the legislature. I said, it makes no sense that that the mayor of Los Angeles or the mayor of any large city doesn't have any connection to a school system which is driving force for the economic health of a city, the democratic health of the city, and the social cohesion that I already mentioned. Was able to get support, was overturned once we passed that law in the courts, and so I went to Plan B. I decided to take over a school district by taking over a school board. We engaged in a 2-year effort. We were successful. And what did we do over that period of time? We went from a 44% graduation rate when I started, which was 2 years in, by the way, to a 72% graduation rate. I took on 16 schools, the toughest schools in the city, the schools in Watts, the schools downtown, and the schools on the east side. I said that the school district overall had a 44% graduation rate. We had a 36% graduation rate. We went from 36 when we started to a 77% graduation rate today. Now, I see some smiles on the face because I'm making eye contact with you. That's really, well, commendable, not good enough. Think about it. Imagine if you had 10 kids and only 7 of them were going on to college. That's not a statistic you would be proud of, nor should we be proud of. What did we do, and what do we need to do to transform our urban schools? I'll tell you what we did, and I'll tell you what I think we need to do in the state, and we need to do around the nation. We need to invest in these schools again. I recognize that when I went to school, we were in the top 5 in per pupil spending. We're closer to the mid-40s today. Money matters, everybody. I was speaking to a few people as I walked in. My kids went to Catholic school primarily, went to really good Catholic schools. One of them went to a private school that cost $26,000 a year. I love when I hear people tell me money doesn't make a difference, and then they send their kids to the best private schools in the country, which cost $26,000, $30,000 a year. Money does matter. Now, that's one group of people. What I've said to the other group of people who say it's only money, I said, I don't buy that argument either. The fact of the matter is, you got to show that you're doing more with the money you got, and you got to use that money wisely if you want to get support from a broader group of people. And particularly when you talk about the urban kids, remember, most of these voters, the people who actually, I shared with you the demographic of the city and increasingly the state and increasingly the nation. The voters don't look like that. And oftentimes their kids aren't in public school. So convincing the voters that there's a connection economically, democracy-wise, and social cohesion is critical because you got to get them ultimately to make these investments. What were the kinds of things that we did? Very simply, we got behind the notion that we need smaller schools. Very simply, we got behind the notion that we got to make investments in teacher training. Very simply, we said we need strong collaborative leaders. Because when you look at successful schools, and particularly successful schools in places where historically they haven't been successful, there are strong collaborative leaders who are focused on teacher training, who are focused on accountability and outcomes, who are focused on the notion that after a teacher, or actually before a teacher, the most important educator for a child, particularly early on, is a parent and a family. So in our schools, and I believe in urban schools across the country, we need to replicate what we see being done in private schools and in our charters. By the way, during those 8-year period of time, we tripled the number of charters. We quintupled the number of charters with highly successful, effective teachers. When we had an accountability mechanism to measure schools called the Academic Performance Index, we tripled the number of charters at 800 and above. We brought in innovation and technology. I didn't mention, and they made it very clear that you have to introduce yourself. And if I went through my whole resume, we'd be here for the 25 minutes that I'm here. But I'm also on the board of McGraw-Hill. And so when you look at what we were able to do and what we need to do to address the English language learner, who I think in California are about almost, well, in the 40s. I don't remember the exact statistic, but in the 40s when you look at the percentage of these kids. 54% of the kids in our public schools statewide are Latino. Somewhere in the 40s, the number who are English language learners. When you look at the two groups who are the least successful in our urban schools across the nation, it's black males and the English language learners, and roughly comparable. In fourth grade reading, they're 35, 40 points lower than kids of European origin, disproportionately lower even than similarly situated kids socioeconomically. So focusing resources on those two groups of people was something we did, that we certainly understood that we had to. I always say this, I tell people, I needed more attention, more support growing up in a home of domestic violence and alcoholism and poverty. My son, whose mother had a master's in education and was a teacher, her father was the most powerful man in the city, did not need the same kind of investment. So the notion that all kids need the same amount of investment is ludicrous. Some kids need more. They don't start off with the same number of vocabulary. So we invested a lot of our effort in the kids that were the farthest behind. I mentioned McGraw-Hill because one of the things that we did to move from 36% to 77% graduation rate to pick up our reading and math scores is we use blended learning and adaptive learning technologies, all of which are provided by McGraw-Hill and our other competitors. I'm not here to sell McGraw-Hill, but certainly wanted to share that with you. But we saw that bringing technology, and this is a technology and education conference, bringing technology into the classroom, bringing modalities that help us measure our performance, but also do it in a way that allows a teacher, as an example, to deal with 35, 40 kids, because that's the size of our classrooms because of the lack of investment, was critical. Parent participation. We developed a parent college. And I said early on when people said, well, how did you succeed? I said, I had a great mom. I had a mom that went to our school all the time. She'd walk to the projects to make sure that she knew what was happening in her kids' education lives. Now in public schools, you can't force parents to be involved like you can in a private school, like you can even in our charters. But you can encourage a change of culture. So we developed a parent college that said, you know what, every parent, we encouraged our parents to be involved in the parent college. Some 10,000 parents in a school of 17,000 students have gone through our parent college. They're participating. They're now, some of them, after going through our parent college, where, by the way, we speak about rights, roles, and responsibilities. We teach our parents they have a responsibility. You can't just give your kids to a public school, to a great teacher. You got to participate. Now, obviously, your level of participation is going to reflect your education, but you got to participate. You got to be involved. So what do we do to address the fact that we're leaving so many kids behind? And in my last 10 minutes, I want to talk about that, because it's really the gravamen of what we need to do. I think we need to replicate what we've done before. One, we've got to fund our schools. We've got to convince the electorate that we've got to spend more money. Two, we've got to develop accountability mechanisms to sell the idea that we're actually doing more with the money we got. Part of how I got in my schools are traditional public schools with a thick union contract, just like everybody else. They are not charters. We cannot cherry pick. We're the largest turnaround effort in the nation. How did we get there? I raised money, something like $80 million, in addition to the money that we got from the school district, the same amount of money everybody else did. Where did we focus it on? I mentioned earlier generally, but specifically in this case, we focused it on the hardest to reach kids, the kids that were further behind. We made sure that we made those investments. We brought in adaptive learning technologies to help us. We brought in dashboards for our schools, for our teachers, so everybody knew where we were. Dashboards that we brought in from McKinsey, dashboards that helped us look at educational outcomes. We developed new measures of teachers' evaluations, and let me be clear. When you look at successful schools, particularly in an urban setting, there is a 1-year difference in terms of a young person's growth educationally. A 1-year difference between a effective teacher and a non-effective teacher. A 3-year difference between a highly effective teacher and a non-effective teacher. The teaching matters. And so we measure our teachers, our principals. You know, if you've ever been to a school, a lot of them are very proud about the fact that they're really good at operating large schools, and particularly in urban settings. Everything's nice, the trash is all picked up, everything's really good. Our principals have to be in classrooms. Our principals are instructional leaders. Our principals are focused on, pedagogy that is successful, particularly in tough urban learning environments. We measure our teachers. There's a big lawsuit going on just recently in California called Vergara. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's basically challenging the notion that seniority ought to be all-inclusive, that it ought to determine every decision that school districts make, and that you ought to have a job for a lifetime. Now, I mentioned I was mayor of Los Angeles. I was mayor of Los Angeles for 8 years. I left with roughly a 58% approval rating. I tell people, which means half the people liked you and half the people didn't, like half the people here. But I tell people, imagine if I had left seeking a third term and said, vote for me. I've been here the longest. Well, think about this. The notion that you would have a job for your life, no matter how well you do, is a notion that goes contrary to almost everything. Many of you are innovators in technology or in education or the confluence thereof. Imagine if you start in your business and, everybody's the same despite what they're contributing. That's what we have in our urban schools today. And so I've argued in our public schools in Los Angeles and in a state that you could be pro-union and say, okay, seniority's an issue. It's just not the all-encompassing issue it is today. And you could have tenure, but a tenure that you have to re-earn every few years, not a tenure that you just have forever. We've got to look at that whole issue of teacher evaluations, look at the issue of how we use seniority and how we can do it in a way that's respectful of teachers, but also respectful of kids. Because part of the reason why some of these urban schools are doing so poorly, every teacher is assigned on seniority. Now let me ask you something. If you could go and teach my son in a more affluent area, or teach me in a poor area, much tougher job, we already have recognized that, where are you going to want to go? Almost everybody wants to go to the schools that aren't as violent, that aren't as tough. And so to be able to assign teachers, the best teachers, to the toughest schools and pay them a little more ought to be one of the strategies that we use. Smaller schools, not necessarily classrooms, smaller schools, principals who are innovators, but also collaborators, parent involvement, adaptive learning technologies, measuring outcomes. I tell people it is not a radical notion. We do it in every one of our businesses to have dashboards that measure how well we're doing. We should do that in our schools. Actually, in my schools, every teacher has a dashboard. Every high school, every elementary, middle, and high school have dashboards, and our system has a dashboard that looks at outcomes. That's the way to track progress. That's the way to identify weaknesses and strengths. That's the way to make investments strategically. It's what we got to do. Ending up, what are some other things that we need to do? Universal preschool. We know that almost everybody here, those of you who have children or those of you who will be putting your kid in a preschool experience. When you look at the number of urban kids that have that opportunity, there's a 30-point difference. And that is actually unacceptable, and it's not working. Because these kids come into kindergarten way behind. They come into kindergarten. By the third grade, we know they're not going to graduate from high school. That's just kind of how it works. And making investments in pre-K early on, critical. Addressing, obviously, the need, again, to make more targeted investments in the kids that are particularly behind, because not all of them, just because they're poor, are not ready. Some of them are less ready than others. Making those investments is critical. Those are some of the things we have to do. Ultimately, when we talk about democracy, the economy, we're here. When we talk about civil rights, let me just share this with you. This is the home of Silicon Valley. It's the home of technology. This state is the home of innovation. I tell people by 2025, we'll be 1 million down in the number of college graduates that we need. 1 million more in the number of people that we need for the specialized skills in the new economy. That's 2 million people. If we continue down the track that we are on today, let me explain to you where California will be. We'll have to import, either through immigration or import from other states, virtually a big, maybe not all, but certainly a large number of the people that we need in the innovation technology realm. When you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, and I've been involved in an effort with Education Trust of the West, which is called Black Minds Matter. There is a connection between the prison pipeline, the prison industrial complex, the lack of cohesion you're seeing increasingly in urban areas, and the high school dropout rate, the lack of college matriculation, the fact that people don't have hope and don't have the skills. All of these things are connected. I tell the Democrats in this political season, I support raising the minimum wage, and we did here in California, and we should. But I tell people that is never going to get us to beyond where we are today. Today, if you ask people, where is America? The place that says, bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, in terms of equality of opportunity, we would all say in this room, we are #1 in the world. Actually, we're 16th and going in the other direction. If you don't think there's a connection between addressing this gulf with urban kids in poverty, of color primarily, but broader than just that, urban kids in poverty, and the being number 16, and this whole issue that you see Democrats and Republicans on two different sides dealing with the fact that people aren't making it, that the middle class is struggling, then you really don't understand the connections. Because to end with, I said, I went to a school, went into the back door, came out the front, and was able to be successful. That can happen to more of our kids when we're making these investments. So as you move on to the rest of these sessions, I'd like you to think about, and particularly the innovators here, what we can do, particularly around innovation and technology to reach a broader cross-section of these kids. The dividends will be great. The benefits to virtually all that I mentioned, the economy, our democracy, because by the way, when you look at the fact that nobody's voting, I used to say to the Palisades, if you're from LA, any of you from LA, I used to say when we had the mayor after me had a 17% voter turnout. And everybody in the Palisades thought it was East LA and Watts that weren't voting. I said, no, let me explain. They voted at 12%, you voted at 24%. That's how we got to 17. You didn't vote either. But the people who historically are not voting are the less educated. It's just as simple as that. So it's connected to the lack of participation. It's connected to the demagoguery you see when you see that disproportionately one person is able to talk to a group of people that aren't educated in the way most of you are. So I would hope that you think about the ramifications of not making these investments now, and particularly to a growing demographic that will be the majority very, very quickly in this state and throughout the nation. I want to thank you as they're standing up and telling me my time is up, and I didn't read a speech, and I think you probably appreciated that. Thank you very much.